I do want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for spending time. I believe that some of you are here because of yourself. Some of you are going to be here because of somebody else that's in your world that has had a loss. And one of the most difficult things is trying to recover from loss. It's going to weigh on some people like a ton of bricks. Others seem to move through grief and times of tragedy with ease, and we wonder how they did it. I don't think there's a magic formula, and there is not one set way for every person. I've told you parts of my story, and that is sometimes when I go through grief, if you go through a certain period of time, you ever have somebody tell you, well, it's been this much time, you should be over this by now, or you should be at this point? How does that make you feel? It can make you feel like you have somehow failed because you're not where you're supposed to be. And I'm going to tell you right now that just like that is said here in this location, you're in the right place. Wherever you are in your journey of grief, you're in the right place. And that is a place to move forward, regardless of where you are, how long it's been. Today is the day that you have an opportunity to move forward. And exactly as you see, this is an introduction to grief recovery. And I think the first thing to have to answer is, what is grief? Because there's so many emotions on the human palette. You know, when we're very young, our emotions are like a box of crayons. There's only a handful of colors there. Remember when you were little and you would just cry for no reason? Of course, when we get older, we do the same thing. We cry for no reason. But there is something about being a child that if they don't know what they're feeling, they'll cry. Or they may have an angry outburst because that's the only colors they have in their palette. Then we get that, go from the 8 box to the 12 box, the 24 box, the 64 box. You may be the 120 crayons with a sharpener in the back. You may be a very complex individual. Am I showing my age? Don't even say I'm showing my age, sir. But there is something about our emotions that are so complex. And trying to handle grief, trying to move past grief is one of the most difficult things in the world. Because the emotions are so complex. It's not just one big black crayon that has created a dark cloud over our world. There's more to it than that. And in the few minutes that we have, I want us to look at what is grief. And what I've come up with is, grief is the price of love. It is what is left behind when the object of our love is no longer with us. It is a complex and powerful emotion that can be overwhelming and all-consuming. Yet it is also a reminder of the depth of our connections and the love that we shared with those that we've lost. It is a journey that we must take. And though it may be difficult, it can ultimately lead to healing and growth. You can't go around grief, nor over it, nor under it, or away from it. You have to go through it. And there are folks through denial, through 101 things, where they try to put themselves, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. Guess what happens when you don't deal with it? It gets worse. You will deal with it. You're dealing with the fact that you're not dealing with it. And what we want to do is to see the positive side. If somebody could go into your world and remove all the emotions from the person you're grieving about, would you want that? No. I've done probably between 800 and 900 funerals. And the most difficult ones are not ones where everyone is crying and hurting and sobbing. The most difficult funerals are the ones where there's no emotion at all. Maybe the individual has been such a scoundrel, they're glad they're gone. Or there is such disconnection that I haven't seen this person in so many years, I don't know what to feel. If you are experiencing grief today, even if it has been years and years, I am thankful you had that kind of connection. Because the alternative would be nobody cared at all. Now, I want you to take just a moment, and I want us to look at the impact of grief and how it can change our world. And these are areas that I want us to focus on. I want you to look at this for a moment to see that part of the areas that we have to look at is the emotional distress. Grief can cause a range of intense emotions such as sadness, anger, guilt, and anxiety. One of the first areas that grief affects is our emotions. That may seem pretty obvious, but sometimes we don't realize that the emotion that comes out is anger. Have you ever had such a time of loss that you went from being sad to angry and you couldn't find the other emotions? They were lost somewhere in the mix. Our emotions are that complex, and if we're not careful, we can lose sight of where we are in the emotional map. It's an emotional distress. There are physical symptoms that come from grief. It can manifest itself as physical symptoms such as fatigue, sleep disturbances, change in appetite. You ever notice that when somebody is deeply grieving, often they lose weight? Or someone finds comfort in their food. We're trying to fill a void. It's not about right or wrong. It's understanding how that intense emotion can even change our physicality. Some people will go to the point where they can't sleep at all. And others, they can't seem to get out of bed. And no amount of rest in the world seems to restore the body. Have you ever been so emotionally drained that you would sleep for 12 hours and get up and go, I'm so tired? This is the power of that particular emotion of grief. It robs the body of what it needs because the mind and the heart are not fulfilled, because there is a void, and usually it's the shape of a person. There is also cognitive changes. Grief can affect a person's ability to think clearly and concentrate. It's described as a fog. And sometimes we want to just say it's age, and I don't know what's wrong with me. Sometimes there is a part of our brain that is constantly dealing with the grief. That work, play, rest, it all seems foggy. Our finances suddenly seem foggy. The drive to move forward just gets foggy, and we can't find our way through it. Have you ever grieved that deeply? And people try to cheer you up. Is it about cheer? No. There is benefit in stepping away from the grief. There is benefit to distraction. But it will not fill that black hole that is the loss. We also have to look at social isolation. Grief can cause a person to withdraw from social activities, from relationships. Isn't it amazing? The one thing we want is that relationship with the person we've lost. And our response is often to disconnect from other people. I don't know what it is about that type of grief. You know, they say that misery loves company. That's not necessarily true. A grieving person doesn't instantly seek out other people. Sometimes they go into social isolation. I want you to think about your church life. Have you ever gone through a loss? You know the benefit of being maybe in a church setting, in a social setting, but your first instinct is, I don't want to be around people. You lost a person. You have all these people left in your world. We know at funerals, we are so glad. Oh, I'm so glad people came in from out of town. I'm so glad these people are visiting. I'm so glad these people are here. Yet when we're given the choice, I want to be alone. There is something about grief that puts us in isolation, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as you're processing it. But can you stay there? No. Because then the grief is magnified. Remember being a little kid taking a magnifying glass and holding over the ants? That's what happens when we go into isolation with grief. We find ourselves magnifying in our loneliness. I want you to look at the changes in behavior. Grief can lead to changes in behavior such as irritability, restlessness, substance abuse. I, of all people, really do appreciate good doctors and good medicine. I'm thankful for pharmaceutical companies. Have you ever had a headache so bad you're thankful for a simple aspirin, Tylenol, Aleve? Understand that we are such complex beings that sometimes our grief can lead to depression that is chemical, not just emotional. There is serotonin and norepinephrine in the brain, two chemical receptors in the brain that help us to think more clearly. When we're at times of distress, loss, and grief, it can burn up those chemicals in such capacity that it may be time for somebody to help restore them. Now, if you're old enough, you'll remember that there were medications like Valium. Anybody remember Valium? Just wave at me. If you're slow about waving your hand, then I know you understand Valium. Thank you, sir. Valium was one of those medications back in the day that kind of took your emotions away. And for an entire time in the 50s and 60s, it was a very popular thing to take away the stress of the world. We found out that was a bad idea because it's highly addictive. New medications such as serotonin and norepinephrine uptake inhibitors are medications that just make sure that what you have up here stays up here. If you don't need it, the worst thing you're going to get from the medication is a headache. The best thing you'll get is not your emotions going away, but a clarity to process them. The problem comes when we try to self-medicate. You don't answer this of yourself. I just want you to think, whether it's yourself or others, have you ever self-medicated, whether with drugs, alcohol, something that would take away? Sometimes people will even try to fill that void with sexual behavior that just makes them forget for a moment. All of these things are trying to fill a void because of the loss of a person. The changes in behavior, spiritual questioning, grief can cause a person to question their beliefs and values and can lead for search for meaning and purpose. Have you ever seen somebody just ask the question, why, God? Obviously, with the number of losses that I've had to deal with in other people's world is coming in as their surrogate minister, their surrogate presenter at those times of loss. Sometimes the grief is so great, particularly when it's a child. It's an unexpected loss. It's a murder. It's a suicide. There are all of these things that can be so heavy that we just ask the question, why, God? And that weight can feel like the weight of the world. Sometimes loss can bring us spiritually closer to our higher power, and sometimes it can make us want to go in the opposite direction because we're looking for blame. We're looking for answers. There's also an increased vulnerability. Grief can make a person more vulnerable to other mental health issues such as depression, anxiety. Have you ever had a panic attack? If you've ever had a panic attack, suddenly it is that I can't breathe, there's an elephant sitting on my chest, you're not sure if you're having a heart attack, and what is causing that? It's somatoform. It means that something up here or something in here is affecting the whole. That's how powerful your emotions are. I don't know what it is. Ever since the loss, I've been tired. I've been sick. My immune system is down. I find myself at the doctor. They can't find out what's wrong. I've gone through all of these medications. I've gone through sleep studies. And there's all these things that at the heart of it is grief itself. Beginning to recognize that becomes part of the solution to moving forward. There are different types of grief, and we'll just take a moment, and I want you to think about you or maybe someone you know to see if they're in one of these types of grief. Identifying it is part of the solution to know where you are. The first part is anticipatory grief. Often when somebody has been very ill, maybe they have Alzheimer's disease, they've had a chronic illness, they are slowly passing from something. Does the grief begin at the death or at the diagnosis? You are correct. It is at the diagnosis. It's at the moment. Sometimes death can be closure. My grandmother, Bernice Flint, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And in her 60s, that used to seem so old. Not so much anymore. She was diagnosed with dementia. And when it came on, she was one of the rare people, because of cerebral atrophy, the brain shrinkage that takes place. Most folks do not get much time once the diagnosis takes place. For 20 plus years, when she passed, there was a sigh of relief that the body could finally rejoin the rest of her. Because a part of her had passed long sooner. And for any of us that was family to her, our grieving began the moment we saw her begin to fade. You may have had somebody in your world that you're anticipating it. Now, about the age of 12 years old, we begin to acknowledge and understand loss. That's why often 12-year-olds in their development begin to fear the death of a parent. Both of my kids asked me at some point when I was going to die. But it was asked, now I'm questioning, why were you asking that? Could have been they're wanting some sort of inheritance. I don't know. But I think the answer is they're now at an age at 10, 11, 12 years old to realize this person won't be here forever. And in the mind of a child, how long do you have? I don't know. And you don't know either. But we begin to feel that anticipatory grief. I remember being 10, 11, 12 years old and thinking about the loss of my parents. And it shaped how I treated them. Because I realized there's only a moment. And even from 12 years old to 56 years old, that long span of time, there was a part of me that always grieved that I would lose my parents. How about you? You see, anticipatory grief is powerful. It's a type of grief that occurs when we're aware of an impending loss, such as a terminal illness of a loved one. It is the grief that we experience before the actual death happens. Have you been there? There's complicated grief. This is a type of grief that is characterized by an intense and long-lasting symptoms of grief that interfere with daily functioning. Let's say somebody has had a tragic car accident. If it's unexpected, it creates a complicated grief. There is a natural process. We tend to accept deaths that happen when somebody has the appropriate amount of age. When something happens that does not fit that model, the grief starts getting complicated. Let's just say there is a father and son, mother and daughter. You can go through any combination, and they were estranged. You can see how the grief gets complicated. There's somebody you had unfinished business with, a conversation that was supposed to be had. There's no way to go back to have the conversation. The grief gets complicated. Complicated grief takes a longer period of time, and it may take counseling to straighten it out. It's very important to know if your grief is a simple grief, it's loss, I miss it, or whether there are other issues that are getting in the way. And you can't process it because of the fog we talked about before. And you don't seem to have the energy to get out to find help because you're not getting the appropriate amount of sleep and you're not getting the right nutrition. Do you see how it can create a cycle where we stay right where we are? Disenfranchised, this type of grief is not acknowledged or supported by society or people around us. It may include losses that are not recognized or validated, such as the death of a pet. It could be a miscarriage. I want you to think about in the LGBTQ world, how many times those relationships may not have been acknowledged. I've been called in on occasion because somebody has died. And the clergy that was supposed to be there for the funeral, when they found out it was an LGBTQ couple, would not serve them. I guess they don't feel grief. I guess they don't count. When God sends us out to give cups of cold water, does he tell us who's supposed to receive the water? No. The comfort? He didn't sort people out, whether they were married, divorced, male, female, black, white. When he's feeding 5,000, he's just providing what's needed at the time. Sometimes society disenfranchises people. Was there a time when race was an issue in this country?
Yes, it still is.
It still can be. You can understand that if somebody doesn't feel validated in their emotions, how they can feel lost out there when nobody sees me. I don't count anyway. To God, everybody counts. And everybody's emotions are important. chronic. This type of grief is ongoing and can last an extended period of time beyond what is considered normal grieving period. Chronic grief is almost, you ever get a cough that you can't get rid of? And they tell you it's bronchitis. Oh, well, what do I do for it? Stop coughing. Well, I can't stop coughing, then you're going to have bronchitis. And you stay in a cycle where it can take months and months to get past it, because what you're doing is constantly irritating the source of the problem. There are times in our grief that we can continue to propagate what's going on. If there's a place that causes you pain, might it be a good idea to step away from that place for a while? Have you ever seen somebody go back and repeat the same things because their pain becomes their comfort? Sometimes grief not only becomes complicated, it becomes chronic. Collective. This type of grief occurs when a community or society experiences shared loss, such as a natural disaster, a terrorist attack, a pandemic. You know, that last of the word pandemic wouldn't have made sense to me until you watch people go through it. 9/11 brought our country together in a way that nothing else will, because did we know the 3,000 people that died? Did we have to? As a nation, we mourned. When there are national tragedies, we mourn. I mean, it may sound simple. Probably nobody in here ever met Betty White. But we all kind of love Betty White. There are just certain people that we can become attached to that when the loss occurs, we all feel something. Sometimes it is a collective grief. And there's various reactions to that very grief. Some of it's emotional. Grief can trigger a wide range of intense emotions such as sadness, anger, guilt, anxiety, numbness. We've got to know what we're feeling in order to be able to process it. If not, it goes back to that fog and that confusion. There is a physical reaction to grief. It can cause symptoms as fatigue, headache, nausea, changes in appetite, the sleep disturbances. Do you find yourself going through any of the physical things that grief is causing? Cognitive. Grief can affect a person's ability to think clearly, make decisions, leading to confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty in concentration. Sometimes it's not you getting older. There may be a deep sadness. I can't find my keys. I just went to the store. I don't know why I didn't come back with that. Is there something pulling at you here that's affecting up here? And remember, chronic grief. There are some folks that have had losses that happened decades ago. The loss of somebody, the loss of a relationship, that they're still grieving over, and they don't realize that it is running through the fabric of everything in their existence. Cognitive. You're already seeing that there. The decisions, the forgetfulness, the concentration. Behavioral. Grief can cause changes in behaviors such as withdrawing from social activities, isolation, and again, that self-medicating with substance abuse. Spiritual. Grief can also cause a person to question their values and beliefs. One event can tear down everything that you are. And if you've been there with that type of loss, then you know exactly what that means. There's stages of grief. Probably one of the most famous people in the world to ever give us these stages is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Her books, On Death and Dying and To Love Until We Say Goodbye, are two of the standards. Now, some folks today will tell you that these stages, they're more complicated than that. This is almost considered outdated. I believe this is still on point. Take just a moment. I want you to look at what we're seeing. First is denial. This stage, a person may deny the reality of the loss or try to minimize its impact. They may feel shock, disbelief, numbness. A horrible thing is, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. How could you be fine? No, I'm okay. I've got this. It's fine. There is a denial that puts up a wall. I can handle it. I don't need anybody. I just need to be by myself. Yes, sometimes alone time can be helpful. Don't give up on somebody that's put up the wall. If you're the person that's put up the wall, you don't have to live behind it. Anger. Surprises people. I can tell you that as caregiver for my mom, was there sadness in watching her condition at times? Absolutely. Some of you in here met Mom, you knew her. Some of you deeply loved her. When did my grief begin? Or those of you that knew her? The moment she began to decline. She was always a vibrant woman. The moment you begin to see the plane or plateau begin to go down, that's when grief begins. That's when the pain starts. I can't tell you how angry I got on any given day. Man, my son is in the audience, and I would look at him and I would say, I need you to help me to be a better person. Because I'm going to hurt somebody. And I don't mean my mom. It's just, I could be in Walmart and some child is flipping out over there and I'm like, I can fix that. Somebody in the parking lot tries to cut me off to get my space and I'm thinking, I'm heavily insured. You know, if you've ever seen your airbags go off, you're about to, lady. It's an anger that just manifested. Am I angry at everybody else? Or is there something stemming from grief? Because a situation is out of my control. Grief is a situation out of your control. If you were in control, would anybody ever die? Would we ever even get old? Would we keep everybody just like we want them and need them to be forever and then go, this is it? Once things get out of our control. One of the things I have to deal with a lot when I'm dealing with death is the anger people feel at doctors. I'm going to get a lawyer. I need to find out what went wrong here. They died. It was a terrible accident. It was a car accident, motorcycle, medication, drugs, you name whatever it is. We want to be angry at the healthcare professionals. Why didn't you catch it? Why didn't you fix it? Why can't... When my dad had an aortic aneurysm that ruptured while he was in the ER, they got him into surgery and saved his life. One of the most successful, rare surgeries to open an 80-something-year-old man up, to fix the aorta before he bled out, and they saved his life. But the 85-year-old, slightly overweight, smoker, drinker, they got his heart going, but everything else went goodbye. And for almost 3 weeks, he was in the most intensive care unit with 5 specialists. We went through everything. Kidneys, liver, everything was not cooperating. He could not regain consciousness, though everything showed he should be fine. My father had exceeded his warranty by a good decade. The tread had long since left the tires, and he was still going. I could either curse the darkness at that moment that these doctors couldn't figure it out, or I could be thankful that I had a decade past what I should have. Does that make sense? It's all a matter of perspective, and my anger would not have changed a thing other than me. Let me say it again. Your anger at your grief will not change anything, but it'll change you. Bargaining in this stage, a person may try to make deals, bargains in an attempt to undo a loss. They may make promises to a higher power. God, if you only do this. We want to bargain. People have taken the hands of doctors and healthcare workers, ministers, clergy. I'll do anything in the world. Please have God, please have God save them. There are times when people in that stage are like, this is a mistake. I know I'm going to get a call that it wasn't them that died in the accident. Depression, in this stage, a person may feel deep sadness, hopelessness, and despair. They may withdraw from others, lose interest in activities they once enjoyed. This is a natural process. I don't want to waste a good depression. You may need to be depressed. If you were not having that kind of reaction to a major loss, I would be worried for you. Depression is a part of the grieving process. It's when it gets complicated, when it gets chronic. It's when we're stuck there. You know what depression is. You know the symptoms. You've all been there. But you can't stay there. Acceptance. In this stage, a person begins to come to terms with the reality of the loss. They may start to find ways to adjust to life without the person who died and find meaning in the memories and experiences. This is some of the first steps in moving forward. It does not mean that everything is magically better. It means that you are beginning to accept the new reality. Coping with grief. One of the first things is you have to seek support. There's some things, even when I get sad, when I get depressed, when I go through times of loss, it doesn't matter how much education, it doesn't matter how much counseling experience. What do you think I do? I call somebody. Do they have to be a professional? My son is working on his master's degree in counseling. I talk to my son. My cousin back there has her master's degree. My cousin Tina has a heart that is as absorbent as a truckload of Bounty paper towels. Cousin, son, is there anything that I need you to tell me? No, it's listening.
It just takes time.
It's about time. It's about being able to have somebody there. It doesn't matter. You need help, a listening ear. Somebody to be able, and one of the things I tell people is you call me, and if you have to call me every day, call every day until you don't have to call anymore. Well, I don't want to, be a burden? It's a part of getting better. Why, and you can answer this question out loud, why don't we want to seek help sometimes? Isn't that interesting? That's the word that came out. What are we embarrassed about?
Looking weak.
What's that?
Looking weak.
Oh, looking weak. Absolutely. What is it? I mean, when there's loss, we are weak. We're tired. We're broken. Have you ever had somebody cry in front of you and they apologized for it?
Yes.
Why do we do that? And I think you're right. There is something in that weakness that we were taught that we're not supposed to. Let me just share with you, we're supposed to. Shortest verse in all of Scripture says,
Jesus wept.
boy, that must have been an embarrassment for him, don't you think? God saw fit to record the day God cried. If he can, you can too. And it's okay. And sometimes you need professional help, and sometimes you just need help. If I was starving to death and a small child came up to me with food, you think I would push him away and say, go get Gordon Ramsay, unless he's making the meal, I'm not eating? I suppose that would be funny. Wherever the help comes, whoever the listening ear, whoever the extended hand, it may be the very thing to pull you back over a line. It's getting help. It's practicing self-care. Why don't we do self-care more? Why don't we take care of self? Some of you in here would take care of somebody else to the point of your own illness and loss, but you won't lift a finger for self. Do you know who I'm thankful doesn't do that? Doctors. Can you imagine rushing to the hospital today and all the doctors were out sick because they didn't take care of themselves? Do you get the point, though? If you don't take care of you, how could you take care of somebody else? How could you be there for someone if you weren't well enough to do it? One of the things that's so important is self-care. Taking care of oneself physically and emotionally is important during the grieving process. This can include getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, and engaging in activities that bring joy and relaxation. It is about expressing emotions, allowing yourself to express your emotions in healthy ways, such as through writing, art, talking to a therapist. Avoid bottling up emotions. This can lead to increased distress. Sometimes the help you get may be with your pet. A cat. I have a few if you need one. You can borrow my cats. Why is journaling important? Because it takes what's in here and it puts it here. It is a form of self-care. You can't carry it all, and sometimes the very thing that will help you is simply on a page. Create a new routine. Grief can disrupt daily routines, so creating a new routine can help provide structure, a sense of control. This can include setting goals, establishing new schedule, finding new hobbies. Sometimes you have to do things in new ways. Seek professional help. If grief is interfering with daily functioning, seeking the help of a mental health professional can be beneficial. They can provide support and guidance through the grieving process. Sometimes you do need the people around you. Sometimes you need somebody who knows exactly what's going on. You need specific instruction, and if it's somebody that can provide medication because you are at a point of serotonin norepinephrine deficiency, they can provide what's needed. Don't worry, folks, we're just about done. Seek professional help. Obviously, we have said that. Remember the person who died. Find ways to honor and remember the person who died, such as creating a memory book, visiting a special place, participating in an event in their memory. Sometimes in loss, memorializing the person and giving meaning to the loss. Many years ago, when my best friend died in a motorcycle accident, the loss to that family was overwhelming since he was only 21 years old. I guess it doesn't matter age when a child dies. His mom said, "I'm going through the worst time in my life. But if there's ever a mom who needs to talk to a mom, I will always be there." She took that moment of loss and grief and made a commitment, and I can't tell you how many countless, sadly, moms who've gone through loss, that she put herself there for. Finding meaning in the loss can help you move forward. Taking things one day at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. One of the most important things to realize is you're not going to get through all of it in a single day. There's no way to process it all. Sometimes you have to go day by day or
Minute by minute.
hour by hour, minute by minute to get through it. Get enough rest, eat well, exercise, taking time for self, connecting with others, engaging in activities that heal. These are all things that you can do as self-care, things that we forget to do, but are absolutely necessary. As we close, healing with grief, you need to find the tools that are going to help you. And that's going to be a sense of mindfulness, meditation, prayer. It's going to be relying on your higher power. It's relying on God to realize that there are things bigger than your loss that are there for you. You may find that help within a spiritual community, a church, a place of worship. It's processing the grief through forgiveness. Some people can't get past their grief because they never forgave how somebody passed, the person that passed, the people that hurt the person that passed. There's all these things that are wrapped up that need to be let go of through forgiveness and finding meaning and purpose in the loss. Finding a way to dedicate your time, finding a way to memorialize somebody. This is probably one of the most powerful things as we close. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the person who was so good at understanding and grasping death and dying, before she passed, she penned these words. The reality is that you will grieve forever. We don't want to hear that. Excuse me? I thought this was... No, hear it out. It's validating your emotion. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same. Nor would you want to. If I could go inside your head and remove all the memories of the one you loved, would that make it better? It would. But do you want that? No. The people I've loved and lost, I don't think I would change a thing. Because it would mean redoing my heart for what they meant to me. I will always grieve for the loss of my mother, my father, my grandmother, my closest of friends, my family. There'll always be a hole there, their shape. It's somehow people just want to fill it with something. It's supposed to be there. Living with that and moving forward to realize that there are still days, weeks, months, years, chapters left, new things to experience, new meaning, new routines. Give us a sense of purpose to move forward. As we come to the end of this grief recovery workshop, this time together, I want to really just remind you that healing from grief is a process. It takes time, patience, and self-compassion. It's a hope that this time will provide you with tools and resources to support you on your journey towards healing. Remember to be kind to yourself and to reach out for support when you need it. You're not alone in your grief. There are people who care about you and want to help you through this difficult time. It is my prayer that wherever you are, if you saw yourself here today, that you'll begin to take those first steps to move forward. Not to let go of the grief, to walk through it, to find yourself in a place where there's healing, and know it can be found.